I just did. Thank you. All right. Well, hi everyone. I hope you have enjoyed the Veganism of Color mini virtual conference so far. This is day two, the live Q&A session with myself, Julia Feliz Brueck, founder of Sanctuary Publishers and sites like veganismofcolor.com. Then we have Doreen Yomoah from Child Free African, First Nations scholar Margaret Robinson, Prateek Gautam, who coined the term caste speciesism, LoriKim Alexander, queer and environmental activist, and ASL interpreter Corina. Thank you for being here. This has been amazing. Everyone joining us from home, you can ask questions by typing them, and I will read them for the panel to answer. However, I am severely inattentive ADHD, so I may forget that that portion exists. So if any of the speakers notice any text, then feel free to let me know. So, while white vegans are welcome to listen in to learn, please remember that this is a space and conversation reserved for vegans of color. So please respect that. We'll wait a few more minutes and see if folks would like to start asking any specific questions. Please write them below if you do have any. I'm frozen?
No,
Oh no.
Karina.
No, no,
Oh, she got kicked out.
Corina is frozen. Corina's screen.
Okay, she's back.
Let me
Hopefully her video works now.
Okay. Okay.
Hi,
Can you
yeah,
hear us?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see you now too.
Okay, good. So, I'm not sure, LoriKim, if you wanted to say anything about your experience yesterday, to talk a little bit about that. I know that it was really, really special for me. Just being able to be there with vegans of color. And in case you wanted to say anything about yesterday, feel free.
Sure. It really was, we talked about being in that space as being healing. And that really was what it was. There was a time, a period of time where we all got really emotional, because it's such a sacred space, right? Not only when, you know, we know we're the global majority, but in spaces like this in the US in particular, people of color aren't afforded space for ourselves and much less to be together. And when it comes to vegan spaces as well, people of color only spaces are very rare. And we need those spaces so that we can freely talk to each other, freely share with each other, and just have some good joy, right? And the fact that it was held at Farm Sanctuary means a lot. Um, I'm very open about the fact that when I was younger, when I was 18, I worked with Farm Sanctuary a little bit, helping one of the folks who does education or did education in the schools. And, I talked to them about being a person of color and wanting to see other people of color and hold space with other people of color. And it was kind of poo-pooed, and there's a lot of gaslighting, a lot of, well, you could do that, but it would be so exclusionary. And it's like, well, do you understand that I'm excluded in general, right? So it's wonderful for them to come to the realization that they can be accomplices in the liberation of, non-humans and humans when they hold space for us like that. And they really opened up a wonderful space. And it was great to be able to be with other people of color and visit the animals. Their presence is just so healing as well. It was very beautiful day, really, really was. So I'm really appreciative that we were able to do that. I really am grateful not only to Farm Sanctuary, not only to Kamika, but to you, Julia, as well, for just starting this process and thinking of that as a way for us to meet in person as well. It just was great, just beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I for me it was, when they approached me about supporting us, to me it was like this would be amazing to make sure that we also make sure to include non-human animals in our spaces and in our conversations, because we never actually get to share with them. So thank you for yeah, for making it too, and I hope that next time we can all meet there in person. um and yesterday we started the talks, of course, with the introduction, and then we started with Doreen's talk. And Doreen, so you spoke about us, when you spoke about circular economy as it relates to individuals. What are some examples of actions we can take as vegans of color?
Well, I would just like to give a little bit of context before giving some concrete examples. So, in full disclosure, I'm not yet an expert on the circular economy. I've done my research on it and I'm doing a course on it right now. But in my opinion, it seems as though the same capitalism that says, we should cram a bunch of people of color from the global south into a room to make us cheap clothes and shoes and, home goods, is the same capitalism that says that we should breed non-human animals like to an unsustainable degree for our own consumption. Like we should create sentient beings but then throw away their personhood and their autonomy for ourselves. So for me, the connection in between veganism and vegans of color and the circular economy is that we need to recognize that this capitalist oppressive system, even though maybe clothing and food are not part of the same circle, they are still driven by the same motivation, which is profit. So I think, for example, instead of buying a new item of clothing from a fast fashion store that was made using uh, a being that was bred to be used by us, and then a person who was exploited to make this item of clothing, we could buy secondhand. And in this way, not only do we not exploit a person who was, working in really bad conditions to make this item of clothing for us, we're also not contributing to any new suffering by a non-human animal for us to be able to, wear clothing. So that's just one example. And then the other really important part about the circular economy is that instead of getting rid of items and replacing them with new items, we really need to repair and reuse our items that we have. And this is another way in which, instead of contributing to even more oppression, this is a way that we can participate in the circular economy. And it might not seem like there's a direct link in between this and veganism, but to me, it is clear that when we reuse and repair things that we own already, whether they're made by a person or whether they're made from the flesh of a non-human animal, we are directly impacting and we are directly contributing to consistent anti-oppression.
All right. Um, so there's a question for Doreen as well. My name is pronounced Ayola. Ayola. I hope that that's
Ayola. Rhymes as Ayola.
Ayola. Um, Ayola says, I really appreciated your presentation, since frameworks such as sustainable development come from the UN, which is still invested in capitalism and patterns of neocolonialization. How would you recommend combating that?
I think that, well, I can't say this officially, but as a person of color from the global south working in the international development system, I feel like my presence and the presence of other people like me who are committed to consistent anti-oppression in the international development system is in and of itself a way of combating it. And another thing is that I completely agree with you that the sustainable development framework sort of comes out of an international system that is still deeply rooted in capitalism and carnism and neo-colonization. At the same time, these frameworks are not implemented without the consensus of all countries. So I think it does us sort of a disservice to ignore the fact that, countries like Ghana and Nigeria and Cambodia and Vietnam were all involved in the creation of these frameworks. So I think what we need to do is really pay attention to the policies that are outlined in this framework and really pay attention to the policies outlined in these frameworks and make sure that we apply them in a way that is consistently anti-oppressive.
And does anybody else have questions for Doreen? Doreen, I think when you talk, maybe put the microphone closer to your mouth. I think it's a bit far down. Um, all right, thank you for that, Doreen. Um, so Margaret, we then watched your talk, and we were actually thinking, what roles can vegans of color have in supporting food sovereignty for indigenous people?
Um, well, something Indigenous people encounter often is when an issue comes up that relates to indigeneity, they end up having to explain settler history to settlers. And so you can sometimes be in I'm sure you're familiar with this dynamic where someone who is in a more powerful position doesn't have to know their own history, especially as it applies to less powerful people. And so you end up having to explain it to them. And then having maybe sometimes there are expectations about emotional support that you offer as they grieve their way through realizing that they have ancestors that have done terrible things and that they are benefiting from that history. So that dynamic can be heavy if Indigenous people, Indigenous nations have to continually explain settler history to settlers. So anytime anyone can pick up some of that slack and explain it, I don't necessarily think that's something vegans of color should have to do. They already have a heavy burden of having to explain history to white settlers. I think that's really something I'd like to see white settlers pick up more heavily. But in terms of just being aware of the history, it would be nice if everyone who's going to live in an Indigenous territory was familiar at least with what the history of their community in that territory is. And anytime you can get to know the territory itself, that way Indigenous people can bond with non-Indigenous people in their areas around taking care of that territory and the other animals that live in that space.
Okay. We actually talked a little bit about this yesterday, and it, so many areas just don't even acknowledge the history, the indigenous people, and I've even experienced that here, where I asked about the native people from this area, and they didn't know anything about them. But
Mhm.
then I found that in a week or in a couple of weeks, they have the First Peoples Festival,
Mhm.
which I feel that everyone should be aware of that, and make the effort to get to know, like you said, the area, the history, and that's especially also important for vegans of color from other areas too. So thank you for that. And LoriKim, when we watched your talk, you said something that is very true, that trans and queer vegans have always been here. So the idea that, you know, we should now be I guess, invited rather than already part of what's being done is a little, it is offensive. So when you said in your talk, approach trans and queer, Black, Indigenous, people of color before even creating spaces, what would be the best way for us to do this in a way that is safe for trans and queer, Black and Indigenous people of color?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that question because I do believe that folks like to have their own ideas about how to talk to folks, and so you can read and you can, um, try to educate yourself as much as possible before you come to speak with people. That might be your first um, plan of attack, right? Because it really just boils down to being respectful, right? And that sounds kind of really trite and small, but that's the very crux of everything. As I feel like as people of color in general, right? But specifically as trans and queer people, as non-binary people, as folks who have been pushed out of any rainbow anything, and who are also pushed out of spaces in general, we are disposable. That's what capitalism does to folks, right? It makes them disposable. That's the end goal, as far as I'm concerned, with capitalism, is disposability. So you can buy more stuff, you can make more stuff, and so if you look at folks as your legacy, right? People as your legacy. When you center animals, we're centering them as a legacy, right? Because they've been here before we were here, and so if we think about the end goal, the longevity of it, that's really the best way to approach it. So come to people with respect and recognize that not only there's a history, but we're going to be your history. So, I mean, I don't know how to say to anyone, this is, make sure you use this sentence structure. No, use people's pronouns. Nobody really needs to hear your backstory necessarily. That I get that all the time. Well, this is how I came to not be racist. First of all, that's never going to be true. Okay. And second of all, that's not why we're here. So let's also do that. Let's focus on why we're here, which is, again, to create a legacy of liberation, because that should be the end goal. What is the world that you want to see? Let's make it happen right now. And how we do that? Meet people where they are. And even if you don't know where that is, be very honest about that. Be very honest about that. I don't understand how to talk to you. So please tell me what it is that I'm missing in this conversation, but just be honest and unafraid. And again, like I said, respectful, because that's one of the key issues when folks come to, at least again, to speak to me. A lot of times, there's a level of disrespect that folks just really don't recognize that they're doing. So, and that's also, listen, if I tell you that you're being disrespectful, recognize that and work on that over there.
And how we talked about also last night at the sanctuary, no baby steps. We don't have time for baby steps. Enough baby steps.
Exactly.
Get in
Exactly.
there. Do the work. Get in there, everyone. So, does anyone listening in, have any questions so far? Janine says, "Hi, could each of the speakers share 5 issues or subjects that they believe are the most common among the compassionate vegan? Not sure if part of cognitive dissonance or some other reasons for all you do."
5 is a lot.
What?
5 is a
I'm
lot
not.
for this many people. So
Yeah, I'm not
put
sure.
that in.
Issues with regards to mainstream veganism. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, but can you clarify the question, Janine? You mean issues in general? And what do you mean by compassionate vegan?
Oh,
Okay.
so the most common mistakes made in the community that you find yourself. I think we've already mentioned a lack of understanding, a lack of not doing the work with regards to even knowing the history, knowing the issues as they intersect with different communities, because we tend to be lumped into, one group. It's like all different. Oh, you're POC, you must be all one group. And then there's like the white people with their billion different countries in Europe, and you know but goodness forbid, I say I'm Puerto Rican, I'm not Mexican. Or yeah, so I think awareness, I think personally, there's a huge problem in mainstream veganism with regards to saviorism. Like, this isn't about, us. It's literally about real life oppression, um, that impacts non-humans, but also their oppression is interconnected to ours. So it's not just about going vegan. There's so many issues that are tied into that. um, Anybody else? I can go on forever if anybody wants to take over.
Prateek, you've been quiet.
Pratik, you didn't talk yet. Do you want to go?
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I can share the things that that vegans in India and mostly in South Asia that they follow is basically just the version of white veganism that they follow, because most of the people who are vegan in our community, I mean in India and in South Asia, are mostly from upper caste. So I think upper caste people, like in India and in South Asia, we follow a system called caste system. So basically, it's an hierarchy that was developed a long time ago, and so the people from higher caste, they oppress the lower caste people, and all sorts of things. So what veganism, when they try to follow veganism in India, is they just simply they just put it from their perspective, not from the animals point of view, animal people's point of view, because and it's sort of very complicated to explain because when you hear the word ahimsa, or when you hear the word non-violence, or whenever you hear such things like yoga and peace and everything, they don't talk about uh, with respect to the animals. They talk about with respect to them, like how it is affecting them and not the animals. So if they're like saying that we'll worship the cow, but they're worshiping the cow not because it is an individual, and they are an individual and they have their own rights, but because they gain something from them, like they get milk and they get all sort of things, so they worship in that sense. And so in a way it's like very oppressive. So when and all the people from the my community, from lower community, they were forced to do all the work that was like all the dirty works. Like when the cow is dead, then we go and clean all of them, and then it's sort of it was in a way very oppressive. So when people from upper caste, they go vegan, they just go vegan in their sense. They don't consider us, they don't consider the animals. So that's the main problem that we facing right now. And if I'm trying to point it out, saying that no, this is not the right way to do, and you should be keeping all these things matter, I'm just excluded from the community. So That's one of the problems that I face so much.
Yeah, since I started learning from you,
Yeah.
I see so many interconnections between, you know, the oppression that you face based on the caste system, and then with regards to race, in that not that they're the same or comparable, but in the dynamics of like the responses of people, where you try
Mm.
to speak and then there's such pushback,
Yeah.
and people just don't understand the interconnections.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, it's so so frustrating, and I'm really glad we connected in that we can speak about this, because even, a couple years ago I didn't know, um, how deeply entrenched uh, non-human animal oppression was with the caste system, and that was really
Yeah.
eye-opening for me. So,
Yeah.
and leading, actually, I have a question for you. So,
Yeah.
what do you think South Asian vegans should do to help address the connections you spoke about in your talk? And how can those of us from different cultures support your message?
I can't. I couldn't hear the last part of it. I
Oh,
Can you repeat the
okay.
last part of it?
So, what do you think South Asian vegans should do to help address the connections you spoke about in your talk? And
Hmm.
how can those of us from different cultures support your message?
Okay. So basically, what South Asian vegans first do is to recognize their own privilege from where they come from. Like most of the people, they don't even talk about caste system. They act as if it doesn't even exist. It's like it's for them it's like a system that existed around thousands of years ago, or when the Britishers came, they brought that system here. But that is actually not true. Like if you just log into Google and search the caste based oppression, like any crime that is caste related, on Google you can go and search India caste related crimes. You'll find like 2 days ago there was a case that happened, and 3 days ago some murder happened, and some sort of things happened that was purely based on caste. So all these hatred crimes that has been there, so it's completely there, but they don't recognize. So what happens is, see, the caste system entirely is based on the animals. Like they divided the caste system based on who benefits from which animal. So if so, cow is considered the most holy animal, like I've already talked in my talk yesterday. So whoever will benefit from the cow will be considered an upper caste. Will be very high on the hierarchy. They will have the power to judge everyone. They will have the power to decide everything, who goes where. They will even have the power to who goes to which toilet, and who uses what and who marries whom. Everything they have the power of. So and then comes down the lower part where you have these horses and all sorts of things. So whoever benefits from them gets that hierarchy, and the people who don't benefit from animals at all, like down below, they are like the lower caste and everything. So that's how the first thing that they should do is, like, they should focus on from where they come and how they benefit from those animals, and how they should stop not just going, leaving their diets and leaving their all of things and just going on the street and shouting about the slogans. That doesn't work. I mean, it works in an awareness way, but it doesn't work in a way that it should. Like first they should know that where they're coming from and what the steps of going vegan they're doing. Like it's very similar. It's like almost equal to white veganism. Like how white vegans, they when they go out and they talk about veganism, they just forget about everything else and they just talk about it in their own sense and everything. So that's how the casteist speciesism and casteist veganism also works. And what other people from other countries can do is, I think they can support uh, anti-caste movements that has been happening in their own countries, and talk about them and try to relate to them in a way, try to relate veganism to them in a way, because we're all coming from, not from privileged races and privileged castes, but from different other backgrounds. So I think it will be very easier for us to connect to them and talk to them. So in USA, there's an organization called Equality Labs. So people can connect to them and talk to them about it, and can become more aware. The first thing is for the other people from vegans from other countries is also that you should know how important it is, like the caste system, because many of the vegans, they look India as a sort of ahimsa land or some sort of thing like that. It's hardly the truth. So I think that's the thing that you can start from. Would you please? It's Equality Labs.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that once you start learning about the words and the connections, and it's horrible that the movement has actually appropriated so many oppressive things just because they don't understand them. And I think that in the way that I hope to be able to support you is by raising your voice, and sort of and not interjecting myself into the South Asian community, no, but in like, if someone says something from my own community that's really like, yoga, himsa, I feel like it's my responsibility to tell them, no, actually, we've, have been seeing or exposed to or taught something that's skewed, and actually represents, the upper caste rather than the actual situation. So thank you for that. Any comments or questions?
Who, me?
Oh, in general, anyone.
Okay. No, I don't.
No?
I think that,
All right.
yeah, I think the talk
So,
was so very informative so far. So I guess, yeah.
and I do have a few questions related to helping us build more community under our vegan identity, because um, I feel strongly that non-humans, if we are saying that we're vegan, and we're invested in animal rights and veganism, to me that also means centering non-humans in their own movement. Um, so um, one thing that um, I'm interested in knowing is, how do you try to include and center non-humans in your vegan activism? And anyone can answer.
Sorry, can you ask that last part again?
Oh, how do you try to include and center non-humans in your vegan activism?
Can I start this one?
Yeah, you can start.
Um, so most of my activism is sort of academic. I write things, I do videos. I'm not a frontline activist, but I think by cultivating a ceremonial relationship with territory and with the other animals that share it, I think for me as an Indigenous woman, that's one of my go-to areas. So when I do promote the work of others who are doing frontline activism, I always have to connect it back to that ceremonial relationship. So if there are water protectors and they're in the news and I'm providing support online through comments, or if I'm talking about it in class and encouraging people to write to somebody, I always try to keep it grounded in that territorial and ceremonial relationship, because it's so easy, especially if you live in an urban space, to be separated from animals, to be separated from other types of living organisms like plants. And so I'm in Nova Scotia, for instance. We just recently had a hurricane. And so one of the things that I did is I went out with tobacco after the hurricane was done, and where particular trees had been damaged or knocked down, I offered tobacco and said a prayer over the tree and expressed that I was sorry for it and hoped that they would bounce back in whatever way they could. But it's about maintaining that connection that consumerism is really invested in undermining and breaking, because people who don't have a connection to their traditional territories or to the territory they live in, and who don't have a connection to other animals, they start feeling that need with material goods. And so that broken relationship benefits people in particular ways when they want to profit from us. So by keeping that connection strong, I think you can undermine some of that dynamic.
Julia, there are 2 questions in the chat box as well.
Oh,
I can't hear you, Doreen.
so there's 2 questions. Thank you all for putting this together. I was unfortunately unable to attend day 1, so I apologize if the following question was already addressed. How are POC's relationships and perspectives toward non-human animals shaped by a history of dehumanization and animalization? And how do we address this as vegans of color? Anyone can feel free to take this question.
Hey, Doreen, were you trying to say something? No. Okay. Um, if someone wants to answer this question, great. I would like to answer your question though, Julia. Before I
Okay, we'll
forget.
come back to it.
Yes, because I'm also
We'll come back to it.
neurodivergent. Yes. So, um, I want one thing. Thank you, Margaret, for saying what you said in terms of bringing animals back into this space, because that's one thing that was really important for yesterday, that multi-species space. A lot of us who are not born in the US understand space with other animals differently. In my country, I'm originally born in Jamaica. I understand space as not mine alone. Not to say that the overarching colonized idea of space in my country, it looks like that. No, it's very Christian country. And so, people look at animals as used to be used and look at space as ours, right? And dominion over your land, right? But moving past that, I grew up sharing space with cows in a residential neighborhood, right? And chickens and goats in the main streets. Any open land, there would be wildlife. And people, I think, in this country have been sanitized a lot. And so don't recognize wildlife as sharing space with them. That, even vegans, and I've been in a lot of vegan spaces, especially Black vegan spaces. I feel like Black folks from the US, or Black folks who have been, have been in this country a while, have been pushed away from our connection with the land and with other animals. And so, if a spider makes it into the space, everybody goes running, right? Now, I understand, okay, spiders look a little scary to some people, and that's understandable. But the thing is that we don't make those connections. And I think the other thing to think about is the way that we talk about centering when it comes to centering animals. Can you center an animal if you're thinking about the way that you would want to be centered? I don't think that's possible, right? So I think that we need to move past the way, like I said in my talk, we need to move past the way that we perceive space, and we perceive giving space, right? What would that look like for animals? That we can't anthropomorphize them, we can't treat them like humans, and we also have to recognize that spirit that it is around us, or however you want to call things, that's shared. So they're already in the space. If you are talking about them, they're invoked in that space. So give space for that feeling. And I think a lot of our spaces are not necessarily, even if they're focused on being compassionate about animals, as Prateek said, it's focused on how am I going to be compassionate about animals, right? So if we give a little more generosity to the idea that we really don't know what we're doing, then that's how we come up with new ways to hold space for ourselves and other animals that share Earth with us.
Would anyone else like to add anything?
I think I'll go. Uh, Very nice, insightful given by LoriKim. I would really like to thank her for. I'm sorry, like uh, for I couldn't get the pronoun, but I'm sorry for that. But yeah, it was really good insight. And what I would like to add is that here in India, what I've noticed most of the time is that almost all vegans, except a handful of vegans left, they talk about animal people and about their rights just in a way of compassion and just in a way of doing a mercy to them. They show the videos and they do all kind of activism, but they don't talk talk about them in a way like we would be talking about ourselves. Like if my right was violated, if my right was taken, if I was fighting for my freedom, I would be talking in a much different way than they were talking about the animal people. So they completely forget about talking about the animals in a way that it should be, as I feel. So when I do my activism, when I talk about them, when I talk about veganism, when I talk about speciesism, I make sure that I'm talking about their rights, their individuality, and uh, their liberty and their liberation, and also acting as a way that it's not about just me. Like I recently got to know from many vegans that they were feeling as a minority, like they were saying that we are the minorities in the country. Then I said, no, you are not the minorities. You're not talking about yourself, you're talking about the animal people. You have to put them in center, not you. Like uh, especially the privileged people who come from. So they actually, there are a lot of vegans who actually started feeling, I'm talking about in India only, they started feeling like they are the minorities, they are the marginalized one, and they're coming from an upper caste, they're coming from a privileged background. I said, no, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. So that is the thing. Like whenever I do my activism, I try to point them towards the animal and not towards me. I try to make sure that it's not about me, it's about them. So that's the thing that I do with my activism.
There are so many interconnections. Like I said, like we get the same with the white vegans. Like, oh, I'm being discriminated. It's like, really?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
really? You're telling me?
I'd also
Really?
like to throw in my 2 cents on the how to center animals in my activism, non-human animals. And I think, like Prateek said, and like you just said, Julia, you as a vegan are not the one who's oppressed.
Yeah,
And when people ask me why I'm vegan, I try to frame it in a way where it's like being vegan's the default position. And I don't try to do it in a way that alienates people, because I know that a lot of people already have a built-in hostility towards vegans. But it's almost like, I mean, why would I wear animals? Why would I eat animals? That's just as unnatural as if I ate glass. Basically, that's the way I try to frame it. So animals aren't there for us to eat in the first place, so why would I even be eating them? Why would I even be wearing them? And that's sort of the way that I try to center non-human animals in my activism.
I like that ability to reframe the discussion that way and put the person in a position where they have to explain their choice rather than the other way around. I think about Janine's question about like the one issue. And for me, it's often the recognition that we might agree that respecting animals, for instance, is an important common value. But I find I often disagree with other vegans about what that respect should look like. And I think sometimes, I think it's maybe more a case for white vegans, but it can be a challenge for some folks to see that there actually is more than one way to express respect. That respect is a cultural kind of term, that it's embedded in a particular place in particular relationships. So there can be multiple ways of expressing the same desired relationship. So just because the way I express respect doesn't look like the way they do it, doesn't necessarily mean one of us is wrong. But there can be a tendency to think that there's only one right way to do stuff. And people want to find the right way and just keep doing it and then promote it to others, instead of being open to a multiplicity of different ways of having the same values.
Yeah, and I think that that's what also it's important that's so important, especially when the way that I think about it, you know, how do I express this? Like, um, when it comes to advocating for non-humans, I feel strongly that, I need to be focusing on my community, and that's sort of what I feel like white vegans need to finally understand. Like, you need to work on your own communities and support the work that's happening already with our communities, because the perspectives, the experiences, the understandings, the history are so different, and it's so complicated that you can't, if like, if you don't know, you're gonna do more damage um
That's right.
than if you just don't speak.
And I
So
think it's important to note too that that about work that's already been done, right? So often, and also if we're going to decenter whiteness, we shouldn't necessarily have to be speaking about it all the time. But the truth is that what happens is the work that has already been done by people of color, by Black folks, by Latinx folks, by Asian folks, by Indigenous folks, specifically Indigenous folks, right? Is always is co-opted to the point where folks think it's theirs. Like they just invented it. They just thought about it, and it's discounted. Any work that's previously done is completely discounted. And so when folks, so to go back to the question you asked me, Julia, that's one of the things, because that's a hard question, to be honest. Like, how should people approach me? Well, let's see what's been done and what you shouldn't do, right? Like, it's hard to say what should you do because, but in any case, one of the things that really people need to think about is the fact that really, when you're talking about learning, unlearning these horrible behaviors, and unlearning this history that we've been brainwashed into, maybe also try to learn who is doing the work first, so you're not reinventing the wheel. um, you know, but yeah, just wanted to make that point.
yeah, and you know and they also don't make it easy to find our own voices in our own communities. It's not easy, and so actually, which is why I wanted to create veganismofcolor.com, because I want it to be like a one-stop place where we could connect to our own communities and see what's happening. So if anyone wants, I'll always, feel free to let me know, because I am one person, and you know, um, I don't always get everything or find everything easily. So, um, yeah. So, any other comments? So, I think back to the question: how are POC's relationships and perspectives toward non-human animals shaped by history of dehumanization and animalization? Um, that's and how do we address this as vegans of color? So that is like a really intense question to
Yes.
answer in the amount of time, but um, I attempted to address that with the help of the vegan community in the book Veganism of Color, Decentering Whiteness, and also with veganism in an oppressive world. and I think all of us here have been involved with those books in one way or another. Um, and so I think for anyone that's really not aware of how these issues interconnect, those are good resources, as well as if you go on veganismofcolor.com, there are other many other resources and people that have been doing the work, like Breeze Harper, for example, or Dr. Harper, for example, Margaret Robinson, who's here with us, and so many others. And it's yeah. um,
I don't want to take up too much space here, but I do want to make a point. Um, to Julia's point,
and take up
earlier,
as much space as you want. You take it.
yeah.
You take
Well,
that
thank
space.
you. I thank you. um, but to your point earlier, so we use the term POC just because it's convenient, right? In the work that I do, I don't ever say community. I say communities, right? Because within each of us, in each of our understanding of reality, there's multiplicity of communities. So this question is deep, and we would be here for a good long while. This is a dissertation question, friend. Um, I just hope you realize this. So if that's something you're thinking about, work on that. But I think that really we can't ever say there's one way, one relationship, or one perspective, or you see, we can talk about the perspectives that were thrust upon us, right? We can talk about the perspectives that we've had to rail against. But there really, I think that, I mean, and that is also multifaceted, but it's pretty consistent across the board when you talk about, um, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, right? That's pretty consistent. There's levels, but it's pretty consistent, that message, right? But it's really important for us to think about how we can't, as people of color, address these issues one way. You got to keep meeting people where they are, and so there's not one answer to that. Not one of us could give you one answer to that. That's why there's books and your dissertation.
And we'd be missing so many people from so many different communities. So yeah. We, um and there was another question.
What makes you hopeful about the work
Yeah,
you do?
yeah. So what makes you all hopeful about the work you do or activism in general? And for me, it's all of you. This is what keeps me going.
Me, I would say the thing that makes me hopeful is that people are changing. I mean, every day people start to listen and realize that we can't keep doing what we're doing, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of every being on this planet. And you can see people having these transformations face to face, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. And so that's one thing that makes me hopeful to keep going.
I can answer the question. What makes me hopeful about the activism that I do?
Hmm.
So yeah, so recently, what happened when the Amazon burning was happening, when they burned down Amazon for lots of capitalists and a lot of things like that. So a lot of people, a lot of non-vegans, leftists, and liberals in my country, they were criticizing the step that was taken there. So and they were all of them were non-vegan. So the vegans, they were trying to tell them that the reason why Amazon was burned out because there is a lot of agriculture, animal agriculture happens, and things like that is happening. But they were not believing. They said that the liberals, that non-vegans, they weren't agreeing. So that this is the reason. They were blaming on capitalism. They were blaming on all sort of things, industrialization, but they were not acknowledging animal agriculture. So the people, and they were trying to connect it through the casteist and all sort of angle. So a lot of people, they contacted me about it. All the vegans who ignored me about the subject, they started contacting me, and they started asking me how to tackle this, how to because they come from your community, they come from your uh, region, they come from your caste. How do we deal this? How do we tackle this? And then they took my article, and they started sharing with them to tell them to read the book and to all the things that they said. Then that's what makes me hopeful, that when the things will start actually going the wrong way, I think they will start acknowledging that caste is a thing, and how it is affecting the activism, and how it is affecting veganism. So I think that's what makes me hopeful about the work.
I teach students who are often in their early 20s. And one of the things I notice there's a tendency to do is to start questioning and challenging binaries, which I think my generation was a little more hesitant to do, and the generation before me a little more, and so on and so on. And so now I notice when there's a binary, there's almost a natural hesitancy to not challenge it. Everyone wants to challenge the binary. And I think that's good, because when I look at the history of how indigenous people have been equated with animals, I mean, in some cases, literally, people have been categorized legally as a type of natural animal in the space. I think there can be a tendency to want to react against that by saying, no, we're better than animals, which I think misses the divide and conquer work that's going on between speciesism and colonialism and racism. And so I think a tendency to reject binaries is good, because then when people want to try that thing that they dangle, that you can be in a higher category over these other people if you just agree with us on these other things, when they try to recruit you as part of their hierarchy, that natural suspicion about those sort of splits can really help you realize what's going on.
When it comes to what I'm hopeful about, it honestly, I think everyone's said it. It's just the fact that we're here now. I keep saying, like, I've been doing this for 25 years, actually longer. But when I was younger, I did not think this place would happen. I did not think that this space would happen. I did not think that that anyone would listen to people of color. Did not think that our liberation movements, the myriad liberation movements that we're working towards, would find a way to converge. I didn't, but I always would work towards, I'd always remind myself, like, what future am I working towards? What future do I want to see? And I keep telling myself that. So hope for the future is the fact that there's people here listening. Hope for the future is the fact that there's people here talking. Hope for the future is that we are in the position to center animals in our hearts, our minds, and our ways of our practices. So that's a great question. I think we should all work on that, because that pulls you out of those dark moments, because this work isn't easy. I think each and every one of us who are speaking right now, and I'm sure a lot of folks who are watching right now, you have been attacked for no reason other than speaking up. So that's what we need to do to keep going, to hold that memory and hold that reality, like that this is the world that we want to see, right? It's happening, and it has to happen quick, but it's happening.
Yes, I think, yes. I think that's a good place to stop because I think, yeah. But unless anyone else has any last comments, or think that was, yeah. Thank you so much. Um, so if we're good to go, I want to take the time to close the conference by thanking you all so much. I know I usually like come out of nowhere and I'm like, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, let's do that. Like, done with that. Next. That's just like how I work. So I appreciate your patience with me. And for believing in all
Is
of this, and
Julia's screen
for
frozen?
oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And
Okay.
thank you for literally being here, for the labor, for the time. I've learned from
Anyone
each.
else would like to ask any questions from the viewers?
Prateek, can you hear me? Oh, I don't think you
Prateek, are
can.
you hearing us?
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I can hear you all.
Okay, Julia was
Can you hear
talking.
me? Can you hear me? Oh, you
Oh,
can't.
I
We
can't
can hear
hear.
Julia.
I couldn't hear Julia.
Okay,
No.
Julia.
Oh.
Julia was talking. She's
She's wrapping up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
We're done, dude.
So quickly, I've learned from each and every one of.
Oh no.
I think we're
Is
getting kicked
Julia gone
out.
for everybody else now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh, I'm back. Okay, okay. So quickly, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you,
can
thank
hear
you.
again. Yeah, I can hear her again.
All right. So before we get kicked off, okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. The videos will be uploaded at some point, hopefully soon, with transcripts. And yeah, just check veganismofcolor.com for updates. And thank you also for everyone that was a guest, and also anyone who donated towards this, and especially also from Sanctuary. And yep, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Julia. And thank you
you.
Thank
to those of
you,
you who joined us.
everybody. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
thank you, Karina.
Yes, Karina. Yay, Karina.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
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 Bye.